So the Troughton era is over. A slightly shorter era than the previous one, but still quite a long one. This era was quite varied, with each season having a different feel and quality, with the middle one perhaps being the strongest of the black and white era. We had far less companions to go over than the previous era, with a far more manageable 5. There were a similar number of changes to the behind the scenes crew, but unlike in the previous era, this time it doesn't hinder the show in the same way. So let's get into the seasons, beginning with season 4. So season 4 began with Troughton entering a few serials in, with him making a strong first impression. With this season having Innes Lloyd's vision for the show from the get-go, it meant it was far more consistent than season 3, which really helped it. Not all the serials were great, but for the most part it was a strong season, which was important given the state of the show after Wiles had left, combined with the fact that we had a new Doctor. Season 5 is perhaps the best of the black and white era, with it featuring some really strong serials, with there being a very good standard of consistency to it. This strong consistency really raised the bar for how good a series could be. While not every serial is amazing, they're almost all great, with some of the most iconic villains of the classic era appearing in most of them, as well as some absolute classics. It did end on a bit of a duff, but compared with the weaker serials of the previous 2 seasons, it wasn't that bad. Season 6 ended this era with a much more mixed lineup of stories, with one of the most notoriously dull ones. Now despite the varying quality of this season, it had 2 amazing ones, with the War Games capping it off, with a classic which changed the show completely. This very varied quality of serials does mean that the season is harder to get through than the previous ones, but since it's also the Troughton season with the fewest missing episodes, that does make it easier to watch. With all of the script problems in the background, it makes sense why this season turned out so varied, but at least it has one of the most unique episodes of the show so far, alongside 2 amazing serials. But we can't just pretend the Space Pirates don't happen though. Now for the characters. So beginning with the Doctor, across 3 seasons, Troughton really found what his Doctor was about, with him really settling into the incarnation we all know early on. While his first season had him finding his feet a bit, it didn't take him long to define himself in the Moonbase, with the following Cybermen serial showing his more emotional and caring side to its fullest. The greater push with comedy from this incarnation worked incredibly well and fit with the very different, more childish demeanour of this incarnation, but the ability of Troughton to switch between this childish side and his serious side is what made him truly strong, with this allowing him to get the upper hand over most of his enemies because of this. These seasons really redefined the Doctor as a character, with an almost opposite portrayal. No longer the strong old crotchety man, instead now the childish clown who can be serious when it's needed. This incarnation doesn't have the same growth as his predecessor, with him being basically the same at the end as he was at the beginning, but that doesn't hurt this incarnation, and instead gives us a look at a more well-rounded version of the Doctor, who has done his growing in the past, and so now slowly shows off his new sides until all is revealed by the end of his first season. Ben and Polly are covered together as they're a duo, and are quite similar in terms of their use and departure. Both continued on from the previous incarnation, with them being crucial to the changeover from Hartnell to Troughton. Having these familiar faces present during this shaky time was important to keep fans on the show's side, and knowing they was the same show despite this. From there they are both still important characters, but Ben does get a bit sidelined for a bit, due to Troughton being younger, and so there is less need for him to do the actiony bits. This doesn't affect Polly, who remains mostly the same across the season, but does become far more screamy than she previously had been. Their write-out is one of the worst handled in the show so far. It's perhaps better than Dodo's because they actually get a write-out, but the serial itself does nothing for them. We were ditching them 2 episodes in and having a brief scene at the end. Admittedly, I've never been a big fan of either of them, as they never really clicked with me, but they deserve better than this. Jamie is next up, with him standing out against all previous male companions. With the Doctor being younger, it meant that there wasn't anywhere near as much of a need for someone to do the more physical activities, which means that Jamie needed another purpose, and that was served by both being a part of a comedic duo, but also being the one to ask all the questions about the world around him. While he does still get many action hero bits, that's not the main focus of Jamie, unlike his predecessors. Combining that with the fact that he's the longest lasting companion so far, it meant that for a time he was somewhat a part of the show in the same way as the Doctor and the TARDIS, and it gave him so much material to work with across this era, which while it didn't really develop him, it did give him plenty of time to be rounded out into one of the most definitive companions. His departure is also one of the saddest due to being forced on him by the Time Lords, worse than by his memories being removed, meaning all his growth and the people he met in his travels are now gone. Victoria was the first new female companion of this era, and made a very strong impression. She has one of the most tragic backstories of any companion due to the events of her first story, with her entire life being turned upside down, which makes her a lot like the Doctor as a traveller without a home. She is a lot more along the lines of the stereotypical female companion, mostly there to get told things and scream, but she is far more well defined as her fear is built into her character. She acts fearful towards most things, often getting scared before even getting into dangerous situations. She comes across as a character with anxiety or a general timidness, which makes her screaming more a part of her character. Despite this, she still confronts the dangers ahead of her, with her going into many dangerous situations even when she doesn't want to. This all works to make her departure one of the best in the show, with her deciding to leave as she can't handle the lifestyle of a time traveller anymore. And due to the build-up throughout her final serial, it makes it so much more impactful. Zoe is the last up, with her being a very well-rounded character who is a lot smarter than all of her predecessors. She has an arc of sorts, but this isn't well realised by the show. From her switching from her more robotic self, which she was in her introduction, to a more rounded and human character for this season. This development had the potential to be incredibly interesting, but the fact that it just shifted does lessen it, although a bit of rearranging to the serials could have improved this, due to Seeds of Death featuring Zoe, who feels far earlier in her arc. Beyond that, both her intelligence and her memory are used a lot by writers. This really separates her from her predecessors who didn't really have that, especially since she is able to match the Doctor at times, which is something no other companion has been able to do. So the Troughton era was strong. While it was far shorter than the Hartnell era, with about a third less serials, the quality was generally higher or at least more consistent. The companions were varied and there were far less of them, which allowed more breathing room for each of them. The Doctor was also incredibly strong, with a new version of him showing what this character can be beyond just a crotchety old man. This era wasn't perfect as it has a few terrible stories here and there, but they're usually paired with a classic right before or after. The most unfortunate thing is just how much of this era is missing, with almost the entirety of Season 4 gone, and Season 5 being better but with only 2 complete serials, although Season 6 does pick up from this, with it being mostly existing. This is the era which really established that the Doctor was the main character, moving away from the ensemble of the earlier seasons, and from the plots having to be carried by the companions. This finally makes the show what it was trying to be for a few years, and although it took a change of actor to do that, the result of this raised the bar again, and allowed the show to take itself to new heights, while allowing the show to have even more potential for the future, and perhaps infinite longevity.